The battle over copper mining at Oak Flat, in an area sacred to Native tribes, has waged for 2 decades. On March 1st, the dispute marked a significant milestone. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals narrowly rejected the argument that the mining activity would destroy First Amendment religious rights observed by Native tribes. The court voted 6-5 to uphold a lower court's denial of a preliminary injunction that sought to halt the transfer of federal land to Resolution Copper for the mining project.
Oak Flat, located just shy of 70 miles east of Phoenix, is regarded as one of the most sacred sites to the Apache peoples. With this narrow ruling, a victory for Resolution Copper, the question now is, what's next for the Apache tribe?
Welcome to the Gaggle, a politics podcast by the Arizona Republic and azcentral.com. I'm your host, Mary Jo Pitzel. I cover the state legislature and state policy.
And I'm Kaylee Monahan, sitting in for Ron Hansen. I'm a podcast producer for the Republic. Today, we're sitting down with the Republic's Indigenous Affairs reporter, Deborah Kroll, to find out what this most recent court decision means and what recourse tribes have now. Deb, welcome back to the Gaggle.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, let's start with the obvious question first, Deb. Does this really mean Resolution Copper can start mining Oak Flat?
Not necessarily. Under the terms of the legislation that was passed in December 2014, Resolution Copper cannot start actually mining at Oak Flat until it gets the keys to the campground. Currently, the land is federal land managed by the U.S. Forest Service. Under the terms of the legislation, after the final environmental impact statement has been issued, there's a 60-day window within which the title deed will pass from the federal government to Resolution Copper. No later than 60 days. As we all know, the first final impact statement was released 5 days before the end of Donald Trump's term in office. Very shortly after that, 3 lawsuits were filed. One by Apache Stronghold, which is the grassroots religious rights group, on First Amendment religious violations. The other 2 were filed by the San Carlos Apache tribe and a coalition of environmentalists and recreationalists on more or less on environmental issues related to like water use, land use, and the like. The last 2 lawsuits are on hold pending the re-release of the final environmental impact statement, which will halt the land transfer even longer. But right now, where we stand is that there will not be any copper mined. Resolution Copper can continue making its plans and doing things like buying up private land, trying to arrange for state trust land in its preferred tailings location, doing mitigation, meeting with local people to gain their support. They've been doing a lot of community outreach, but they cannot start tunneling that lateral tunnel at the bottom of the 7,000-foot tunnel until they get the keys.
Was this ruling a surprise to any of the parties? I mean, it was really close. Was that expected?
From my understanding, from talking with Apache Stronghold and with some of the other people who are the group's allies, it wasn't totally unexpected. And yes, it was a pretty close decision. They have gone into this fully expecting that this is going to be appealed to the Supreme Court.
Help us understand the Ninth Circuit Court as far as its leanings. Is it a moderate court, or does it lean to the right or to the left?
The Ninth Circuit used to be the most liberal-minded circuit court in the U.S. In recent years, it's started to move ever so slightly to the right. I believe that was because of some of the latest appointments by Republican presidents. But it's still pretty much down the middle, as you saw from this decision.
As you've noted, Apache Stronghold has said they're going to take this case to the U.S. Supreme Court. Is there any reason to doubt that move?
Oh, no, they're going. They have the backing of Becket Law, which is the nation's premier religious rights legal group. Again, from what my sources were telling me, is they expect this is going to be the native version of the Hobby Lobby case. If the Supreme Court takes it, which we all know is always a what if.
Well, and if the court were to take up this case, then what would that mean for the ongoing religious practices by the Apaches and other tribes? And also for what would that mean for Resolution Copper's plans?
We would still be in a holding pattern. The U.S. Forest Service has pretty much allowed the Apache Stronghold and the Apache peoples full use of Oak Flat until the day that the keys are handed over to Resolution Copper. If the keys ever get handed over to Resolution Copper, they don't have to abide by the 14-day camping period. They hold ceremonies out there all the time. They're doing sweats. There's generally somebody from Apache Stronghold living out there. You know, Wensler's been there. That's his primary place of residence ever since he first started this. So the only thing that's going to change is the new environmental impact statement being released and not having another lawsuit to do an injunction to relitigate this until it's done. Or if the Supreme Court takes the case and whichever decision the Supreme Court rules.
By the way, when is that new environmental impact statement due? We
don't know. As you remember last year around April, there were some rumors floating around that, well, it was close. They're going to do it this summer. And those rumors were quashed by the federal government. The only thing the Forest Service would tell me last week when we did a run-up to the anticipated decision is that reconsultations with tribes are ongoing. So they're keeping whatever they're going to do close to the vest.
At the core of this case is an argument over religious protections. In fact, Wensler Nosey, one of the main leaders of the Apache Stronghold, who you said is living out there, he said in a statement that Oak Flat is essentially akin to Mount Sinai in religious importance. So in light of that, how do native religions work as opposed to what people might be familiar with as far as Christian religions, Judaism, Muslim, all of that?
Most of the Abrahamic religions revolve around churches or having a personal relationship, whichever of the gods they choose to worship, Jehovah, God, Allah, whatever. Churches can be brick and mortar. They can be a place like Mount Sinai. They can be like the Lourdes miracle site in France, but they don't necessarily have to be in a physical place. In the various native religions, they're what they call a land-based religion. So there are certain sites, whether it's a grove of redwood trees, a spring, the top of a mountain, or in Oak Flat's case, a riparian zone. That's where the power is. Think about Sedona and its vortexes and the New Age people, and they say, well, there's power there. Well, in native religions, there really is power in these certain places. And so if that religious site is destroyed, the spirituality that it holds, the place where you go to have a connection with your god or gods, because some of the native religions have more than one deity, where you go to have that experience, you can't have it anymore because the power is gone, the site is gone, the land is gone. And that's what he's trying to put forward, is that a lot of native religious sites have suffered this fate, and he doesn't want Oak Flat to be one of those.
Then given that, Resolution Copper has said that, if it prevails and is able to proceed with the mine, that it'll still work with Apache Stronghold on ways to protect its right to exercise religion. But, what would that look like? This is a land-based religion, as you said, and this fight's been going on for 2 decades.
So let's suppose that Resolution Copper gets the keys. What they have said, both in writing and in interviews with myself and other journalists, is that Apache people will continue to be able to use the site as long as it's safe. At the end of the day, this block cave mining means that Oak Flat's going to turn into a almost 1,000-foot deep, 2-mile wide crater. So sometime in the 40 years, which is the anticipated life of the mine, Oak Flat will not be safe for any human or other creature to be on top of, because it's going to collapse upon itself. So when that day comes, the gates will be locked and nobody will be allowed on the property.
Remind us, how much projected copper is in Oak Flat?
It is one of the largest remaining, if not the largest remaining, untapped source of copper in the United States. It's humongous. There's billions and billions of dollars worth of copper down there. The issue is how they want to get it out of the ground. What they have told me is that doing the traditional shaft mining that's been done in the Copper Triangle is not going to work there because it's so deep and so hard to get to. And the ore is a lesser concentration than in other parts of the Copper Triangle. And so they've told me that block cave mining is the only way to practically get it out. Naturally, other mining experts have told me otherwise, but this is what Resolution has said.
And circling back to the religious significance, a lot of different religious groups have had their eyes on this case. And assuming for a moment that the case ends here, say they don't go to the Supreme Court, what would this decision mean for religious protections?
You're absolutely right. There's a lot of religious leaders out there who are seeing this as a bellwether for what direction the United States is going to take. Is it really going to honor the First Amendment's religious protections? Or, as some of the religious leaders have told me, that native religions are the low-hanging fruit, and if Oak Flat goes, is my religion going to be next? Are the Baha'is going to be outlawed? Or are the evangelicals going to be outlawed? Or are the Muslims going to be persecuted? There's so much angst amongst religious leaders as to what could happen next.
How has this decision been received by Arizona's congressional leaders? And also, I'm curious, does the Biden administration have a dog in this fight?
The only congressperson I've heard from so far is Congressman Grijalva, who did say that he thought it was wrong. He's floated several pieces of legislation to reverse the rider to the Must-Pass Defense Act that caused all this to happen in the first place, none of which have gotten to the full House. And the Biden administration, it's hard to parse, but based on their statements of their commitment to clean energy, their commitment to divesting the nation of fossil fuels by their chosen method, which is, electric vehicles and more electric generation by renewable means, copper's needed for that. So read into it what you will.
But obviously they have no formal role in the litigation.
Well, the United States government is being sued, the U.S. Forest Service. So naturally, the Biden administration is involved through the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice has been fighting this all along.
Well, you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier in our conversation, but I wanted to just dig in a little bit more about the other lawsuits percolating around Oak Flat. What other lawsuits are in the wings that might reactivate?
There are two other lawsuits in the wings. One is filed by the San Carlos Apache tribe. The other is filed by a coalition of environmentalists and recreational enthusiasts and the Arizona Mining Reform Association, which is an association that's not totally against mining. It's just totally against mining the way it's been done in Arizona over the last 100 years. They are awaiting the reissuance of the final environmental impact statement, upon which I have been told definitively over the weekend that if Apache Stronghold's suit falls by the wayside, almost immediately after the new EIS is issued, they're going to reactivate their lawsuits. They are bound determined that this isn't going to happen.
Wow, this is a story that's a long way from ending. Deb, thanks so much for coming on and sharing all this update with us. If people want to follow your work on social media, where can they find you?
I'm at Deb Kroll on Twitter. I'm at Deb Kroll on Facebook. I'm at Deb Kroll on Instagram.
And that is KROL on the last name.
Think of it as an old-fashioned radio station, KROL.
Love that. Thank you, Deb.
Well, that's it for this week, Gaggle listeners. Do you have questions about today's episode or topics you'd like us to cover? Well, let us know. Send us a message at 602-444-0804 or a voice memo to thegaggle@arizonarepublic.com. That's all one word, all spelled out.
This episode was edited and produced by me, Kaylee Monahan, with additional support from Amanda Luberto. Our news direction is by Kathy Tulamello, and episode oversight is by Kara Edgerson. Our show music comes from Universal Production Music.
Never miss an episode of The Gaggle by subscribing to us wherever you listen. And if you learned something new today, be sure to share this episode with a friend. You can also leave us a review and rate us 5 stars. You can follow The Gaggle on social media at AZC Podcasts, and I'm at Mary J. Pitzel, that's PITZL, no radio call signal there.
And I'm at Kaylee Monahan, that's KAELYMONAHAN. The Gaggle is an Arizona Republic and azcentral.com production. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next Wednesday.